Hello, how are you all doing? And welcome to another Community Office Hours with the fabulous and fantastic, and maybe fabulously fantastic Vault team. How are you all? Are you well?
Doing good, thanks.
Nice. Well, I'm pretty excited today. I hope you're all excited, and thank you all who are watching there live. Where if there's just too much excitement, I can't even contain myself. I'm excited about my excitement, but I think we've got an interesting things to look at today. We've got the possibility of please, if you have any questions, start thinking about those, and we can field those into the live chat. Literally got the experts to be able to answer those for you, and also kind of if there's anything that you're sort of wondering around patterns as well, think about those. Please put those in the questions, and anything else, well, ask away. But I think I'm thinking it would be wonderful to do a round of introductions. I'm going to start. Maggie, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well today. I am Meggie. I'm the engineering manager for the Vault core team.
Awesome. How long have you been with the company, Maggie? I think about 12 months?
No,
No.
I joined at the end of January.
Well, so in lockdown months, that's like 3 years, right?
Yeah, but I don't think it quite counts that way as far as work experience, but it does as far as certainly as far as life is concerned.
That's wonderful. We're very pleased you did join us. And hey, Nick, how are you? I'm going to go in some reverse order, just getting all the Nicks in. Are you well?
I'm doing well. It's a nice snowy day here in Montreal, so great way to start spring.
Awesome. And you're an engineer on the Vault team.
Yeah, I've been on the core team for about a year and a half now.
Nice. So in lockdown months, that's like 25 years. You're ready for gold watch and retirement.
Just about.
And Patrick, buddy, last but very not least, how are you?
I'm doing really well, thank you. So I'm the technical program manager for the Vault team.
Awesome. So I'm wondering, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions, and then I know Nick's got a little demo which he wants to show off to us. Maybe it's a nice way to get started. But here's a quick abstract question for you all. What is your favorite feature of Vault, and why? And we'll go reverse order. So Patrick, you first.
No, that's a great question. I think at least I haven't been in with Vault for a long time now, but uh, the Transform Secret engine has actually been really cool to see as I was able to kind of see it from kind of the beginning of uh, the development and research phase and all the way to fruition. And I think that has been kind of an awesome thing to see be developed straight from the beginning. So
I'm
I'll
really
probably say that.
excited about the potential for Transform and where the features like that are going to go. I think that'll make some big differences to the way that people work with encrypted data. Just for anybody on the stream who's not aware of the Transform secrets, it's a new feature that was shipped in 1.4, and unlike something like the Transit secrets engine, it allows you to configure things like the masks or the the part of your data which you want to encrypt. So you could do things like partially encrypt data. You can leave it in a format of you want. So it gives you a much more sort of flexibility that if you can interrogate the data without kind of opening it up to be read. So it's a pretty cool thing, and we can kind of look through some of those things. But Nick, what about yourself? What's your favorite?
I guess I have two answers. The first one's kind of wishy-washy, but being on the core team, I really like it's more of a meta feature. The fact that Vault is really like a platform for plugins and how
Right.
extensible it is. So on the core team, our main focus is addressing the common infrastructure used by the different backends and plugins and so forth. And I really like how we are able to save the plugin authors from having to worry about common concerns and just focus on their core responsibilities. But besides that, I'm a big fan of the replication feature. It's really cool how it works. It's really a very valuable feature, and I really enjoy working on it.
And I just kind of want to just maybe bring something interesting up. I think around the plugin system. The plugin system now, Vault is obviously written in Go, but you don't need to author plugins in Go. Is that correct? I think you use a gRPC based plugin system. Is that?
Theoretically, that may be true. I've never actually seen a non-Go plugin,
Uh-huh.
and I don't know how hard it would be to do, but in principle, there's no reason why it couldn't be.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe there's a weekend challenge for someone. And Maggie, favorite Vault feature and why?
I feel like for me, I think encryption as a service and just being able to send something to Vault to get it encrypted and then save it somewhere else. I feel like this is a way where like you can use Vault to do really powerful things, to not have to worry about how your own encryption is working. It ties into my previous experience and how we like I can see how we would have used Vault to do that um, in a way that would have made some of the stuff we were doing a little bit easier.
I think I agree with you. I love encryption as a service, and the reason I love it, I come from a development background, and for me, I don't really know what I'm doing with encryption. It's my humble opinion. I know enough that it's enough very easy to make a mistake inadvertently without realizing it, and being able to distribute all of your encryption needs to Vault, and the fact that the Vault, you know that it's built by experts and the cryptography is implemented correctly and is validated. That's a big deal for me. I think it just makes life so much easier. I get so much better sleep at night. Well, just before we jump over to some questions, Nick, I believe you've got some new features which you may be able to show us.
Well, sort of. I'm going to do a little demo. Let me share my screen. Can you see that all right?
Candid, could you just zoom it up just a touch there? Maybe a couple of levels.
I'll try. It's a little bit funny how it does the terminal setting, and I should have looked into this first. One moment.
You're okay. While you're kind of looking at that, maybe we can tackle one of the first questions that we have in the chat here, which is, can a Vault policy have the ability to create and update a secret and to see the keys but not the values? So I think if I'm correct in what you're referring to there, Brad, is around the ability for you to create policy and for that to be granular. So to kind of have like in some ways, a role-based access approach. And you absolutely can do that. I mean, it's very specific on the back end that you're using, but the way that Vault policy is authored, and because everything in Vault is a kind of an API path. So things like configuration is an API path. Accessing a secret is kind of via an API path. You can configure the sort of the various different things such as updates, reads, creation, deletes, and all of those things through the policy. It makes it incredibly sort of granular from that approach, and it's a very good approach as well to take a separation in terms of reads and writes for your applications. And I'll just drop a quick link in the chat in a moment there around Vault policy. You're using a Mac? Is that a Mac there, Nick?
It is, yeah.
Can you
Does the font?
Maybe just Apple plus? Is that going to play nice with you there?
Sorry.
Just the Apple plus to zoom the font up a bit.
Oh, I think I did increase the font already, and I don't think that would work in the terminal I'm using.
Oh, okay. We just got to if you could bump it up just a little bit more, that would be wonderful. Sorry, dude.
Alrighty. How about 24?
Yeah, I think that looks good to me.
All right. So I'm not running a vault. I'm going to start a little dev vault. So basically, I'm just running it with the dev option. So it runs in memory. This is just a nice quick way to get a vault server where you don't have to write any config files. You don't have to set up anything. You just start a vault server and can immediately connect to it. You can optionally specify the root token you want to use so that you don't have to parse it out of the output. So using this, there was a feature introduced in Vault 1.3, which I just wanted to give a little bit more attention to because I haven't seen a lot of people talking about it. I haven't seen it in any demos, and it's not a very sexy feature. It's kind of, mundane, but it's actually really useful. We wrote this for to help support our customers so that we can easily get information about their vault clusters when they escalate problems to us. But really, it's useful for anyone who has to support a vault cluster when you're trying to figure out what's going on when there's a problem to help collect information to help diagnose. And ideally, you should be running in a system where you're already collecting your logs and your metrics and everything. So some of this may be redundant, but it's still helpful. So I'm going to run it just for 10 seconds. And the idea is while Vault debug runs, it's going to be periodically querying your Vault cluster based on your Vault actor and your Vault token, and it's going to collect various kinds of information. So it's going to get a sanitized view of the config with any sensitive information stripped out. It's going to get some information from the OS about the host on which it's running on. And it's going to collect some metrics and profiling information and hit some status or health endpoints. And it's going to put it all into a little tarball for you. So now it ran for 10 seconds and collected a bit of information. If we extract that tarball, we can now see that there is, for example, this config blob, which is just a JSON version of whatever HCL you had, or in our case, since we're running a dev server, it's really just all the defaults. There's also host info, which is, again, basically querying /proc or whoever your OS exposes information about the host that it's running on. And so we can see CPU information, kernel information, memory information, and so on, disk information. And then these status files are the result of hitting the status and replication status endpoints. So again, you can collect all this information yourself, but Vault Debug is just a handy way to get it all at once in one place. And you might want to run it for a while, right? Because like these metrics, for example, right now, I think we only have a single element in this array because I only ran it for long enough to do one collection cycle. But this would collect multiple, well, it looks like there's two. So, if you don't already have metrics collection set up, then this is one way to get some information when you're having a problem. And there's also some profiling information, which I'm not going to go into right now, but because it would be a longer conversation. But if you know how to use the Go profiling tools, then you can use what's in here to run like go tool pprof, and then you give it your binary name or the path to the binary for Vault and one of those files, and you can get some information about like where memory is being used and so on. So that's cool. Now, if anyone's paying attention, you may notice that there seems to be like a glaring omission from here because we're collecting host information and metrics and health endpoints and so on, but there are no logs in here. And that's something that I would expect from a feature like this, but it turned out to be somewhat hard to do at the time, and we wanted to have something out there, so we punted on that for the moment. And sooner or later we will do that. I don't know exactly when, but I'm going to give you a little preview of some other work that's ongoing, that's on a branch right now, and is probably going to be released before, well, in a not too distant future. And this is a tool that we basically copied from Console and Nomad to look at logs as they're being written. So we can say, for example, Vault Monitor, and it's just going to sit there and not do anything at the moment because there's nothing happening in the logs. But if I run a command that's going to generate log activity, like if I choose to enable a new secrets function, for example, then this is the output of Vault Secrets enable KV. And this was actually output from the Vault Monitor command because it was getting that out of, well, it was streaming the logs that Vault is writing. So Vault writes them to the file, but it's also sending them to the connection that Vault Monitor has open, which is pulling that information as well. There's only one option to this command, but it's a really useful one. You can specify the log level. So if you're maybe using the info log level for your regular server logs, which is probably what most people would want, you could say instead that you want to see debug level log information. Even though it's not being written to the log, you'll still be able to see it in your Vault Monitor output. Now, unfortunately, I didn't think ahead to this step of the demo to actually think about how I can generate some debug logs, so I don't know whether I'll be able to demonstrate that. Let's see, well, we've got, no, I'm not going to try and extemporize, but that's the idea. And again, this is not in any current Vault releases, but it should be forthcoming.
Nice.
And we will probably use that same technology that we implemented to write Vault Monitor eventually to enhance Vault Debug, so it also collects logs as well as metrics and so on.
It's very cool. We've got just a sort of a follow-on question on that. Fanny in the chat is saying, can Vault Debug be run on any of the Vault servers in the cluster? Are there any limitations from where it can be run against the running cluster?
Yeah, it uses Vault Adja and Vault token as usual. So you can point it at whichever server you like. There's currently no facility to say, get me all the Vault debug information from all the servers in a cluster. That would be a nice feature that I imagine someday we might do, but at the moment it's not there.
Marvelous. And I've just got a question here. So we're kind of looking at conceptually, I suppose, around Vault. And one of the questions in the chat here is, does it make any sense for an early stage startup to use Vault? Do you need to use a cluster to begin with, or can you start with a single VM with Vault?
You can certainly start. Okay, well, let's take these one at a time. Does it make sense for a small organization to use Vault? It might. It kind of depends on your use cases. It's potentially overkill, right? If all you need is to store secrets, static secrets, if you just want to record some passwords and you're not worried about doing rotation or anything like that, and you're already running in the cloud, maybe you want to use your cloud secrets manager. But there's certainly a lot of things that Vault does that you can't do with one of those. Like you can do something like dynamic secrets with many of them, but it's not as flexible and it doesn't handle as many different kinds of systems that you might want to auto-rotate secrets for. And there's, of course, all kinds of more specialized secrets engines that just don't exist in these cloud KMS systems or cloud secrets managers. But supposing you do want to use Vault, do you want to set up multiple servers? You probably should. Usually, if you're going to use Vault, it's going to be a key part of your workflow. If Vault goes down, your services are going to break eventually. So yeah, set up multiple servers, use HA. It's really not much more effort than setting up a single server, and you'll be happier knowing that if there's a problem with one Vault server, that another one will be able to take over.
And it doesn't say on the oh, sounds a strange bit of static I've got going on there. It doesn't say in the background for the question, but I'm wondering if the author, Ilango, I believe, apologize, see my screen. Are you running Kubernetes? Because I'm wondering, does that have any bearing on things? Because if you're running Vault on Kubernetes with the Helm chart, how do you would you say that's an easier way to manage Vault, or maybe a more accessible way than having to provision virtual machines and
Yeah, generally speaking, I mean, if you're already invested in Kubernetes, it makes sense to run Vault on Kubernetes. There are some security ramifications, of course. So there are different trade-offs, of course, whenever you look into security questions between convenience and security and risk and so on. So um, the best practices for running Vault, if you are paranoid and you want to be as secure as you can, is run it on bare metal. And then the further away you get from that, the more potential risk is introduced, because there's more attack vectors that are available if you're running on VMs, or even more so if you're running on containers, and if you're sharing that container environment with other systems that could be attacked. So, it's case by case. Like if I were deploying Vault and it were an organization that were already a heavy user of Kubernetes and wanted to use the same tooling, I would probably deploy Vault on Kubernetes, but I might put it in its own cluster, so that way you don't have to worry about any attacks against your pods leading to exposing the keys to the kingdom, and you have a more sort of constrained, safer environment in which you can run Vault in isolation. But it's also, depending on your use case, it may make sense to run it in the same cluster too. It's case by case, depending upon your appetite for risk and the sensitivity of the secrets you're trying to protect. If this is a test environment and there's nothing terribly significant at risk, maybe it's going to be simpler to run it in the same cluster.
nice. And just looking down, we got another question here. And the question is, are there any docs or examples for running Vault with CI/CD pipelines reading secrets on demand? I've seen quite a few decent examples recently around running Vault with CI/CD. Certainly our own Rosemary was doing a weekly live code with Circle CI, and they were looking at how you can kind of integrate Vault with the CI/CD. And also my good buddy Oscar from Jenkins X was putting some stuff together around how to use Vault from within Jenkins pipeline. And we'll kind of dig those links out and we'll get those posted up. But does anybody, I guess in general, have any advice or any good tips around integrating Vault and continuous integration?
I can't speak personally. I haven't, well, okay. So I run Vault and CI/CD all the time, but it's usually just for the sake of running the Vault tests themselves. And it's not exactly the same. So we, spin up throwaway Vault clusters that might last for a few seconds or a minute or two, run stuff against them, and then discard them. Often these are just in-memory Vault clusters that don't have any storage persistence. And I think often when people want to use Vault from CI/CD, what they really want to do is they want to deploy their application containers and give them as faithful a reproduction of the production environment as they can. And so they want to have maybe a persistent Vault cluster that's set up similarly to how their production Vault cluster is running, and they want to talk to it that way. And I confess I have never done that. I've read about it, I've thought about it. At some point, I'll probably have a reason why I need to do it, but I haven't yet. So I'm not the right person to answer that question, I think.
No, that's cool. I think there's certainly a lot of capabilities within Vault. I mean, you've got things like the app role authentication. You've got the ability to do token wrapping, to be able to integrate Vault with CI. And I think there's a number of different ways that you would want to integrate Vault with CI. Certainly, CI itself needs secrets. Sometimes I need an access to an API key to be able to do something as part of my build pipeline. And sometimes I need to be able to deploy a secret or deploy a token to a virtual machine or a pod or a Nomad job or whatever unit of work I have in order for it to operate. And I think there's some really good stuff out there. We'll try and get some of the links collated around that, because I think it's I think it's interesting stuff, and well, very cool indeed. Let's have a look. What do we got here? I'm trying to read and talk at the same time, and this just doesn't work. My brain is definitely one track. It doesn't. I don't multitask. We have trying to define structure. Okay, so I suppose do we have? Are there any recommendations? So one of the questions has been trying is trying to define a structure for KV engine and having trouble finding a structure that doesn't require very finely grained policy or secrets duplicated in multiple places. Does anybody have any sort of recommendations or any good patterns for a way of, I suppose, structuring secrets in KV?
So one thing that some people are not aware of that can help with this is the plus wildcard segment used in ACL policies. So that was introduced a few versions ago, but it's still not as widely known as it should be. Everyone knows about globbing, using the star character to match everything from there on after. But you can also use plus to say, just this segment between these two slashes can be replaced with any value. And that's one way that I've seen people often dramatically cut down on the size of, or the number of policies that they need to define for different groups, let's say, to access different areas in their KV store. Without seeing an actual example of the problematic structure and duplicated policies and so on, it's a little bit hard to offer any further advice beyond that.
How about sort of taking the use of the templated policies? If you're using sort of advanced concepts such as advanced identities and aliases.
That's an even more obvious first step. And it shows that I'm more of a developer than a user of Vault, or I would have reached for that first. But yeah, that's a great idea.
Well, I think it depends on, I suppose, whether the thing you're trying to access, as you mentioned yourself, organizational structure or hierarchy.
Yeah, but identity is a very powerful tool for addressing that very question. So thanks for bringing that up.
Well, maybe for folks, because I think certainly identity is one of the lesser known features of Vault, but it is very, very sort of very powerful. Could you give us a quick 101 on the kind of the concepts of identity and maybe how it relates to authentication and secrets?
Sure. So it's again one of those sort of infrastructural things that Vault Core takes care of so that plugins don't have to worry about this. The idea is that Vault wants to do identity-based authentication and authorization. So we don't want to do the old school approach of looking at, let's say, IP addresses or something like that to decide what people are allowed to do. So Vault wants to know who is the caller, who is this thing or person that's talking to it that's asking to do something. And so we have this notion of entity. And we want to know, well, when we answer the question, who is doing this call, we answer it by identifying an entity that's coming in based upon the authentication method that they're doing. So we will actually associate an entity with each caller, and we will try to reconcile that entity across multiple different authentication providers. So you might connect one day using your GitHub credentials and another day using your LDAP credentials, and the administrator can configure the system such that we're able to reconcile those two different authentication sources and recognize that behind them is the same entity or person. And you can do this something similar with groups. So you can query, let's say, the LDAP server and find out what groups the user belongs to, and you can translate those external groups into groups that Vault keeps track of internally. And then you can set up policies that make use of those groups. So you can say, for example, if they're in the LDAP admin group, then they should be part of an admin group within Vault that has privileges that regular users do not. And then to get back to what Nick was talking about earlier, you can make use of that entity and group information that Vault knows about of the caller in order to set up templated policies that interpolate the variables associated with the entity and the groups it belongs to into the policy rules, so that you can say, for example, if they're in the group admin, then this KV folder called admin should be accessible to them.
So you can
Does
set
that
it.
about sum it up?
Yeah, I think so. I think one of the interesting use cases is kind of as well the hereditary, and also the fact that policy can be cumulative, because I may be a group of developer advocates. That might be my group, but I may also have specialized individual permission. So I can actually have this cumulative approach where I have my developer advocacy permissions, which is access to a particular group KV and certain permissions on the cluster, but maybe I am also a special administrator within that group. And that's correct, isn't it? I think you can kind of have this cumulative approach as well, which makes it incredibly flexible to override and to add and permission.
Yeah, well, that's the people sometimes are frustrated because there's some deliberate limitations in Vault in terms of how you define policies, because we want to make it easy to make them additive like that. So people would like to have more sort of negative policy rules, but that makes it much harder to efficiently merge policies that are coming from different sources and say, oh, well, this person has access to all these things by virtue of being in these groups or being this person. And so the simplicity of the Vault policies and ACLs actually is beneficial once you start looking at these larger systems.
We've got a question here from Brian. So Brian says, I'd like to use Vault to store identities and entities, but the data those identities need access to could be stored in other databases or services. Could I use Vault policies to secure the other data? So I'm wondering, just on this, Brian, around sort of clarification. Do you mean that, for example, I have access to a particular database which has some data that I use for my day-to-day business, and therefore I would need database credentials for that database? Is that kind of what you're thinking along those lines? Because I believe theoretically that sort of approach is possible. You can use Vault as a broker for identity for other sort of usernames and passwords, specifically around sort of the database capabilities and cloud credentials, because Vault can generate dynamic database and dynamic cloud-based credentials on demand with short TTL and revoking for when I commit them to GitHub, which I've never done in my life. Honest. Sorry, Marks and Spencer.
Yeah, that seems like an opportunity to use dynamic secrets to generate those credentials for accessing those systems. Or to go back to the encryption as a service, if the data in those, like if you had encrypted data with Vault and then stored it in another database, then you could control who could decrypt that data. So you could I think you could approach that problem a lot of different ways.
I really dig the encryption as a service thinking that you got going there as well, because there's double benefit to that. One is that you get to actually control access to that encrypted data, but you also get to encrypt it, which is not always the easiest thing to do for encryption at rest in a data store. That could be a pretty cool use case. So we've got a question here, which is from which is, I noticed the ability to create secrets in Vault with no associated keys via the web UI. Is there a situation in which we should be using this functionality? I'm just wondering, are you kind of thinking, so you could create a blank document, kind of like a folder? Do you think is that what what was going on, because generally when you're looking at things like the key value store, you have different layers of hierarchy. So you can obviously have folders of sort, but ultimately the thing that you want to store is an encrypted document, which is keys and values within it. I'm just following up on Brian's question. So Maggie, Brian's just asking, just sort of following up on your answer there, with encryption as a service, that he could then use wrapped keys to provide access.
I'm not. I suppose. I'll admit that the wrapped keys use cases are still ones that I have yet to come across and thoroughly understand in my adventures of learning lots of new things about Vault.
But it might, in some ways, I suppose you could, and maybe it's better and more secure just to literally just use the Vault API, because then all you're dealing with is that authentication token to Vault, and Vault's doing all of the heavy lifting around the decryption of the data, and the key never gets out of Vault itself. There's no chance for it to leak.
It also depends if, other users or applications need to access those systems and aren't set up with Vault or can't be set up with Vault because you don't have direct control over them. So it kind of, I think it depends a lot on your specific configuration and your specific use case, and it makes it kind of tricky to give a generic answer.
Gotcha. Just clarification around so we're saying that a key value pair with an empty key string. So the ability that you could create, for example, I create a document in the KV store, and I add a parameter of Nick is, and I don't have a value for that. So I just create the key. Is there a sort of a legitimate use? I'm guessing that that's the way that the UI works, is the UI is actually just storing a blank string as opposed to putting a null entry in there.
I think he was saying the opposite, though, where the key is the empty string. And I don't think that should be possible. If you can do that, that might be a bug. I haven't seen that done, but I certainly can't think of a legitimate use case, and I don't know how it would work. So maybe file a GitHub issue.
Yes. So hope that clears that one up. Let's have a looky. What do we have? Oh, we got a question here. What is the best solution to rotate a key used for encrypting data stored in a database?
So presumably this is a transit question. You're using encryption as a service, and you're using it to encrypt the data that you're writing into your database. And now you want to regularly rotate that key. And how do you then update all the data that you stored encrypted in your database? So you're going to have to manually handle the update of your database. There's no facility involved that I'm aware of that lets you, that takes care of that part of the problem for you. But Transit does have facilities for doing key rotation, and you can say, for example, that you want this key to create a new version, and you want the old version to still be valid for a while, so that you can, while you're in the transitionary state, while you're migrating all the data, which could take hours or days or who knows, the old key is still good. And then once you finish migrating all your old data, then you can make the old key version be unusable.
And when you encrypt data with Vault using Transit Secret and a key, does Vault give you any form of hint within the data that's the ciphertext that you get back of which key was used or which version of the key was used, or would you have to go through?
I'm not sure. That's you're hitting the limits of my transit knowledge, I'm afraid.
Worst case scenario, you'd kind of have to just try it a couple of times, but definitely capable to do that with a batch process. And Vault keys, you can have multiple in existence at any one time to allow that sort of seamless rotation, I believe. Let's have a look at the next question here. Is there a way we can use Terraform to provision virtual machines on VMware on my local machine? Oh, I got suckered into answering a Terraform question. Do we have any Terraform experts here? I know I saw Rosemary Berry on the live chat there. I don't know is the honest answer to that, because I've never played with the VMware provider for Terraform. Pankaj, if you don't mind, if you drop that question into the sort of the discussion forum at community.hashicorp.com, we'll definitely be able to get an answer to that on you. But off the top of my head, I wouldn't know that. Now, Ivan is asking, if we have multiple domains, different apps as well, accessing a Vault cluster, how would you limit access to certain secrets? Is it predominantly a case of policy, or is there maybe a different way where you would go about that?
Well, I think there was some answer or discussion in the chat already. And namespaces was brought up as one option, although that's an enterprise-only feature. I think a lot of open source users would just do it with policies. It's perfectly feasible.
And it's pretty straightforward, I suppose, if you're dealing with a lot of things that you can actually use convention around, maybe stating that the first subpath is always going to be the domain to which whatever falls beneath relates. I think that's a good way to kind of follow things. Ivan, if Ivan is saying if the company's not big enough to justify the enterprise license, yeah, I think that kind of approach. There's a number of different ways. The enterprise software is obviously wonderful, and it pays all of our wages, to which we're very, very grateful. But you can satisfy quite a lot of things with Vault. OSS is incredibly, incredibly powerful. You definitely will be able to find a very good solution around what you want to do there with OSS if you can't justify the enterprise licensing. But enterprise will definitely make that life easier for you. Let's have a looky. What do we have? So we have a question about Vault login with IAM groups. So John is asking that right now it appears that if he wants to use auth with IAM, each IAM policy needs to have a specific role attached to them, where we would like to use just the group. And I'm not an expert on AWS IAM policy or that, so I'm not even going anywhere near that.
I'm afraid I'm not either. I think there are some people in the chat that are. I think I saw Jim Caliphate in there earlier, so hopefully he has some time to address that question, because I'm not going to be any help there. I'm more likely to mislead you than anything else.
I do apologize, John, for that, but it's quite a bit of specific on that one. But certainly a great place to follow that up is the discussion forum, community.hashicorp, and we will definitely get back to you and look into that, because it is a really interesting question.
Yeah, I mean, the cloud stuff is often, very complex and requires a lot of specialized domain knowledge, and that's partly why we have this split on the Vault team between core and ecosystem. And so the core team is more focused on the common elements across all of Vault and all of its plugins and so on. And the ecosystem team has a lot more domain knowledge about specialized plugins like the cloud-based plugins.
Awesome. We have, let's have a look. Yash is asking, when you use the transit secret engine to encrypt the ciphertext is prefixed with a key. Oh, it's an answer to my question earlier on there, Nick, which was, does the transit secret engine give you a hint as to which key was used to encrypt the data? And Yash is saying there that it does. It's going to prefix it in the ciphertext. So when you do that rotation of your data, you'll always know which version of the key was used to encrypt it, which you can therefore use to decrypt and then re-encrypt with the new key. That's a
Yeah, that
pretty
rings a bell.
smart
I just
thing.
didn't want to assert that based on shaky memory. There was also a question before that from JR200 about the use case for transit for auto unseal. Yeah, so most of the time, if you're running in the cloud, you wouldn't use transit auto unseal. You would use your cloud provider's auto unseal. If you're running on-prem, of course, you don't have that option. So maybe you're going to have a very minimal cluster running transit with Shamir auto unseal that you use to support multiple other clusters that they can use auto unseal. And that minimal cluster, because it's doing nothing else, maybe it's easier to keep it up all the time and to have less disruption. And so it just, there's still benefit in the sense that you can at least not have to worry about unsealing your production cluster if something happens. Like if Vault storage becomes unreliable for some reason, maybe using a cloud-based database or S3 or something like that, and there's a momentary interruption that can lead to Vault sealing itself when it gets an error from the storage backend. So it's really helpful to have auto unseal on your clusters. That might be one reason why you would use Transit.
And if anybody was at HashiConf, it got Kelsey Hightower to wear a Vault t-shirt for a week.
Funny story, that was actually a weekend project written by Chris Hoffman, who is my former manager when I joined on the Vault team. Just over the holidays, he realized it was something he just wanted to do, and he knew it wouldn't be hard, so he decided to do it, and it's already provided a lot of value for a lot of people.
That's awesome. It is an incredibly cool feature. Just for a little bit of clarity here as well, we've just got a little answer around John's question around the IAM groups. IAM groups is a feature which is coming in an up-and-coming release, but at the moment you are going to be somewhat restricted to having to deal with separate roles, but it is coming. What do we got next? We have a question, which is, how do you import a console snapshot into a new Vault cluster, which is running Raft in the CLI? So
that's an easy one. You don't.
You can't. Okay, right. So even though the sort of the Raft database, obviously, the latest version of Vault has now gone. It is GA, right? It was GA 1.4, I believe. Yeah. Out of beta. So now you have the same sort of data store which is used by console, but the two are not compatible. It's not possible to interchange just by flipping a switch and importing that Raft log from console straight into Vault. Righty.
So your options are you either use the migrate command if you want to transition in place. If you have enterprise, you would set up a DR cluster using the different storage engine and then fail over to that. On OSS, I think you're going to be stuck taking some downtime.
Gotcha. Let's have a looky. Well, Brian's asking, does Vault Enterprise include a managed service? I guess we've been doing a lot of stuff around with console. I don't know if anybody has any knowledge around that sort of stuff, or is that is it? I'm looking at people who are like, you can't answer that question. We don't know. We don't want to answer that question.
The answer is not right now, but we have been doing a lot with console as a managed service.
Cool. Maybe watch this space then. We have a question again from John, and John's asking, if I use Vault to dynamically create database credentials and my database uses connection pooling, what happens if that token expires that generated those credentials while my database is still using them? Okay. So I'm guessing that you're obviously generating database credentials with a short TTL. What happens if Vault decides to revoke those database credentials whilst they're still being used by the connection pool?
They'll be revoked. So you want to try to ensure that, let's see, connection pooling across multiple applications, like an external connection pooler. Or are we talking connection pooling within the same application, like within a JVM that's being shared across multiple threads?
John, yeah, John, if you can put a little clarity, yeah, around that, but I think you're absolutely right, Nick, with around the sort of the basic stuff. You kind of you have to accept that if you're running a short TTL, then and again, it depends on the database, because certain databases will close the connection the second that a credential is revoked. Some databases don't. I believe the default with MySQL, for example, is that when you delete a set of credentials, if there is an existing connection which is open, it won't immediately close that connection until things sort of shut down. Of course, you can control that with the revocation statements, but the generic approach is that you want to be alerted that there is an expiry impending around set of database credentials. And generally, if you're using something like Vault Agent will run at about sort of 50% of the lease, and it will generate a new set of credentials, provide them to your application. You can then, of course, start a graceful shutdown and rollover of one connection pool to another, which is using the new set of credentials. But it is a manual. Well, it's a process which you have to handle yourself.
You can also do renewal, of course.
Yes.
Even if you have a short TTL, it's still acceptable to allow for auto renewal or to allow for renewal that you will have to do if you're not using Vault Agent yourself. But there's no reason why you have to find yourself in the situation where a legitimate application has authenticated to Vault, has fetched a dynamic database credential, and it's still running, and that credential expires while it's still running. I mean, it can have a background thread that's doing renewal of the token, let's say.
You know what you should do, Nick? I got the solution for this.
Yeah.
You want to get me to write your application, because I write crashy code. There is no way there will be any uptime on any application that I've written on this planet which will outlive the TTL of a Vault credential. Problem
You're
solved.
too modest.
John, hire me.
It's much better than that.
We're doing. I'm having fun. I don't want to, but we're getting close to the end here. What we got? Some questions. Concentrate, Nick. So looky. We have.
I was hoping to come back to Ivan's comment about I think this is about the console to Raft migration. I think that would be a very manual migration, and you would have to know very specifically like what you wanted from your old data store, and then like what you wanted from your old storage backend and what you wanted in your new storage backend. So like you could do this, but it would basically be, I have my old cluster and I'm going to stand up a new cluster and just manually pick the data that I want. And then I don't, stop clients from using the old cluster and make them use the new cluster. I don't so you would run the risk of like missing something. But if you're only using KV, that might work. But even then, I think console and Vault will use there might be difference in, I don't know, Nick, do you know if there's difference in how they would structure things that are stored in KV? So that might not be.
No, from the user, well, what we're describing here is using the Vault API to extract data and then re-import it to the other cluster. And so the storage backend should be transparent from that perspective. What you get back should be the same regardless of the storage backend. So it's a viable strategy depending upon the amount of data you have, as you were hinting at earlier. If you have a relatively small Vault cluster and you know how to access all the data in it and have confidence that you've got it all, then yeah, you could certainly write a manual migration process that doesn't have downtime using that approach.
And you mentioned something earlier on, I believe, around is it specifically Vault Enterprise which has this new migrate command?
Nope, you can do migrate. It's not new, and you can do it in OSS as well.
Okay.
But it does mean that while the migration is happening, the server will be offline.
Understood. So you have to take everything off. Gotcha. And what do we got here? Looky. if folks have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in to there. Otherwise, I'm going to roll with a HashiCraft cast podcast question, which to end the show, which is we always do a slightly traditional, yet I would like to say mostly irrelevant question. And we've been saved on that one. So, are you too late to the party to ask, what is a smart way to authenticate with Vault from an untrusted device from within PowerShell? You are absolutely not too late to answer that. Does anybody have any suggestions around that? Authentication to Vault from an untrusted device within PowerShell. So, guessing Windows, PowerShell, so LDAP, if that's an option there, you can always...
Well, there's a lot of implicit or there's a lot of undefined elements to that question that make it hard to answer. So if it's an untrusted device, what does that mean exactly? How are you going to authenticate? Are you going to put something secret on there? Some kind of like April secret ID? What does it mean when you say it's untrusted? So one possibility is April, like I was hinting at, but then again, you're going to probably have to put a secret ID on there. So how are you going to protect that secret from being used by unscrupulous third parties? There are some talks out there about setting up April in that kind of environment. In fact, I did one for HashiDay's APAC a few weeks ago. But I think really it sounds like a general secure introduction question, which is the whole, how do I bootstrap a Vault client so that it can authenticate to Vault, despite the fact that we want all the secrets in Vault. So I think secure introduction is the keyword you want to use in doing research for how to address that.
Yeah, so the Ignore is saying that it's a device in a Windows server and the customer's network. So, I mean, I think do manage that server, but indeed secret management is a concern. So if it's server application, certainly Ignore. You could use April ID and have a look at that. One of the things around untrusted access to secrets as well is definitely take a look at the audit log and the things that you can do around access to secrets and things just for checking that that there's not unauthorized access to the Vault cluster from if something's leaked. There's a bunch of stuff you can do around the audit log as well. And let's plow through these last couple of questions.
That's right. Secure introduction, Ignore my channel.
What's the best strategy of protecting the initial secret the Vault client uses to get into Vault, say from a VM where we can't rely on a trusted orchestrator?
That's, yeah, secure introduction again. It's a big topic. So I don't think we have time to really answer the question properly here, but that link that Rosemary pasted is the talk I was referring to, which is one of many that are out there. And I linked to some of the others in that at the end of that talk as well.
Well, we're at time. I want to thank you all very, very much for coming on and chatting with everybody. I'm sure, and I hope that it's been really informative and been really useful for everyone. And well, to come back next time, because I'd love to see you all. And I'd love to see you all as well. All lovely internet peoples. Everybody's an internet peoples these days. But until then, thank you all. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Maggie. Thank you, Patrick. And
thanks, everyone.
bid you a good farewell. Bye.